You're listening to the Dungeons, Dragons, and Psychology Podcast. Hello, and welcome to Season 3 of the Dungeons, Dragons, and Psychology Podcast. I'm very excited to have you back this year. We're going to be having on some new fun guests, some authors. We'll be seeing the return of many of my companions who you have heard in the past, and I'm looking forward to that as well. I do want to give you a little bit more information about this year's season. First of all, is going to be less frequent postings than previous seasons due to the fact that I know that I've got a PhD program that I'm going to be working on, and I will be definitely heavily invested in doing my dissertation. The episodes that I do bring you, I'm going to put a little bit more research into and a little bit more time into to make them a little bit longer episodes than we were doing towards the end of Season 2. That way you can get a little more information with each of the episodes that I do put out, but I'm not going to be getting one out every single week, as obviously my PhD is going to take the brunt of my time and energy for a little bit of time. So just want to give you a heads up on that. Don't expect every single Sunday there to be an episode dropping in your feed, but do keep checking back because I am going to continue to put out episodes throughout the year with more information and more research behind them. And I am planning to include research on role-playing as part of my dissertation, so I will be discussing that on the show as everything moves further along with it. But today, for our topic, I want to get into something that has been all over the place over the last year. And I think as we begin a new year, it's a good thing to start talking about because I'm sure some of you have already dabbled in it, and that is generative AI. Today, we're going to discuss how it can be used in your games, what the benefits and the drawbacks are, and I will even give you some ideas for prompts to use in various different apps. I'm Robert Walker, author of Session Zero, the DMG to writing great campaigns in any system. And this is my show where I teach collaborative storytellers how to have more immersive campaigns using psychology. I think one of the first important steps in understanding generative AI and how to use it in games is to know a little bit about the history of it. And while it might seem that it is such a relatively new thing for us because it has become so widespread in the last couple of years, its roots actually go back quite a bit further, all the way to 1966, which is when the first chatbot, Eliza, was created by MIT professor Joseph Weizenbaum, and that chatbot was designed to simulate conversations with a psychotherapist and to be used in a therapeutic setting. So even as far back as 1966, we have this idea of simulating conversations and generating that. In 68, Terry Winograd created a multimodal AI that could manipulate and reason out words according to instructions. So even in the 60s, this concept had begun, but really some of our biggest innovations from it came first in the 80s when Michael Toy, along with Glenn Wichman, developed a Unix-based game called Rogue, and it used procedural content generation to dynamically create new game levels as you played. And that's something we've seen utilized over and over and over again. Another big leap took place in 2011 when Apple releases Siri, the personal assistant that can generate responses and take actions in response to voice requests. Next, in 2014, scientist Ian Goodfellow developed generative adversarial networks, or GANs, and they pit two neural networks against each other to generate increasingly realistic content. And that was another big step that really leapt us forward. A few years later, 2018, Google researchers implement BERT, which trains more than 3.3 billion words and can automatically learn the relationship between words and sentences and paragraphs, and even predict the meaning of text. And that transformer has over 110 million parameters designed into it. Then we get into 2021, where OpenAI introduces Dolly, which can generate images from text prompts. It's a combination of Wall-E, which is the name of the first fictional robot, and the artist Salvador Dali, just in case you were curious where the name came from. Then in 2022, Stability AI and CompV's LMU released Stable Diffusion, which is an open source code that can automatically generate content from text prompting. And OpenAI releases ChatGPT to provide a chat-based interface to its GPT 3.5. That came out several years earlier in 2018, but as ChatGPT 3.5 gets released, it really paves the way for language translation and the creation of content. Then here, of course, in 2023, which we just finished with, Getty Images and artists start suing companies because they are now having Stable Diffusion and ChatGPT infringe upon their copyrights. And so that's sort of where we're at right now, with generative AI exploding into apps and subscriptions and all sorts of things all over the web. You can sort of see how quickly this technology is coming to be part of our day-to-day lives. You can use it in almost everything now. Searches, art generation, idea generation, story building. You can use it for having conversations with Microsoft AI in WhatsApp and just directly chat with something. So it's going to be around. This is something we're going to have to get used to. And I believe that as a dungeon master, it is a tool that if you use it litigiously, it can be very effective in enhancing gameplay at your table. It can also be used destructively to artists in the industry. So that is something that we have to be very considerate about and think about when we are deciding how and when we're going to use generative AI in our Dungeons and Dragons or other role-playing scenarios. So now we understand where we are and sort of how we got there. I want to talk first about some of the benefits of using generative AI in your TTRPGs and some of the ways that I have utilized them in my stories already. The first, and I think probably most obvious way to use them, is to save time. It can be a time saver for NPC creation, plot development, just by throwing a few prompt ideas into Claude or ChatGPT or Google Bard. You can have a concept ready to go for your players to start gaming right away. Or if they run off on some tangent that you didn't expect in your game, as we all know as DMs happens so frequently, pretty quickly you can have a generative AI program throwing ideas at you with a few prompts so that you don't have to stop your story for the day and say, hey, let's regroup or let's come back next week. I don't have anything prepared for this. You can get enough ideas to just keep things going with this. And I think so for time and efficiency, that is one of the best ways that it can be used in your tabletop games. Next, as you're creating your world or you're creating your plot and you're creating your story ideas, use it for creativity. It can fuel creative thinking by giving you unexpected and unique story elements that maybe you weren't considering. So you can ask it for an idea for a campaign, for example, and then it might come up with like 15 different ideas. Even if you don't like any of them, there might be something in there that you can use, something that says, okay, well, that has sparked my creativity. That has given me another idea that I can use in my game. So just having it there as sort of a generator of concepts from which you can draw is very effective as a DM. It's also adaptable and flexible. You can adapt to player choices in real time when you're using generative AI. If somebody's like, I even used it, for example, in one of my most recent campaigns. I had a character speaking to an NPC that I didn't think they would be talking to, and they said something that I personally didn't know how to respond to or how they would respond to. So I threw a prompt in there and said, how would an elf who is very cautious about the elven traditions and history respond to this statement. And then it gave me like 5 different ideas of how it might respond, one of them being in anger, one of them being with compassion. And then I was able to look at that and say, okay, yeah, I like this idea for them to respond in this way. And then I just took that concept and applied it to the NPC that I was DMing to move the story forward with that idea. So that's one example of how it can help you be flexible as a DM and adapt to a situation that you might not be ready for. Next, a way that I have used it for my games is in generating art to either capture the setting or the mood or even specific NPCs that I have a really unique feature I want to have visualized by the players. Now, art is one of those that's a little bit tricky because art in particular is something that is facing a lot of challenges. Using generative AI for generating artwork is drawing and learning from the internet on a whole bunch of copyrighted images. So the images that are put out may also be in violation of copyright laws. And there's going to be a lot of things that come out on this as the lawsuits progress and as new laws are passed about generative AI and how it can be used for art. But in the meantime, I feel fine about using them for my games, my personal games that are just me and my players around a table. Because, I mean, we all know we scour the internet for artwork to find pictures of NPCs and we use them, and we're not generally buying them. We're just showing our players a picture on a screen of an NPC, and then the game goes on, right? We give them an idea of what this NPC looks like. We're not gaining any monetary value from this game. It's just something that we do as DMs to have a visual representation of who our characters are talking to. And I feel fine doing that with generative AI, especially, like I said, if I want the NPC to have something very unique that might be difficult to find in a Google image search for an NPC. What I don't feel fine with doing is using it for anything that I would be having published or public. If you are going to be publishing an adventure or a module or anything like that, and you're going to be using or gaining monetary value from your work as a dungeon master, even if you're, say, a DM for hire, I would not use generative AI, especially images, for your story. Pay an actual artist for the work that you are getting paid for. That's the right thing to do. We want to get paid in this industry. Other people who are trying to survive by creating artwork and things for the industry should also be getting paid for that. That's where my opinion on the matter lies. If it's private and non-public and it's just for the space of my table where we're having a good time and I want a quick image generated to show them what this NPC looks like according to my imagination, and generative AI is going to give me a pretty good example that can be done very quickly, yes, absolutely, I'm all for using it in that way, in keeping the story flowing and helping add to the feeling and the setting and the senses that are being experienced by my players. But if it's going to be something of monetary value for me, definitely do not touch it. So next, let me tell you another way that I've used it, and that is just story prompts. So providing a prompt to generative AI and asking it to provide you for story prompts, or story arcs, or quest ideas, character interactions. It's very good at that, just providing a whole dump of ideas from which you can draw on for your story arc. It's even really good at giving you like a beginning, middle, and an end. You can ask it for a 3-part story idea in the classic 3-part story of what characters of so-and-so level should be doing in a specific area of Faerun. There's enough information on the webs for it to grab all of that content and to give you a few ideas of what characters could do in that world, in that specific place. You could even just say, in a fantasy role-playing game of level so-and-so, give me some ideas of a quest that my characters could do starting from a city, and it will give you a bunch of ideas. And it's great for having that sort of, here's what the next quest idea is. Now, I will tell you, I use this quite a bit to generate ideas once again, but I rarely use exactly what the AI has generated as my plot. And I think part of that is because I know that it's drawing from ideas that already exist. It's not really great at imagining new things in terms of story, because it has to come up with patterns. That is what it's doing. It's taking patterns that exist and giving you ideas based on those patterns that exist on the internet. And when you have that, if it's a very repetitive pattern, it might be something that has already been done many times over, but it doesn't mean that the idea isn't something that you can grab and transform into something unique for your table. Okay, now the thing that I use generative AI for the most, and the thing that I believe it is most useful for, is generating quick descriptions of things that your players interact with, especially things that you did not have prepared. For example, if they want to go find a local alchemist in a town that they get to because they're looking for a specific crafted potion that may or may not be in the rules, and I didn't plan on them going to see an alchemist, asking generative AI to describe an NPC alchemist with whatever keywords I like to give it or whatever input I give it as part of that, that's where it's really great. It can put together a personality, common phrases that they might say, any hidden agendas that they might have, how they're going to interact with the players, the name of their shop, all that sort of stuff that you would normally have to take a few minutes and scribble. You can just ask it to do it for you quickly. It pops that information up and you can run with it in your story. And then it's like you never have to skip a beat on stopping to prepare that character, especially if it's a character that does not really matter to your story. But it can enhance the world by having all of that information generated for you right at the touch of a button, and you don't have to stop the game. You can just keep moving forward. So if, for example, your players jump into a town and they're like, run up to the nearest guard and say, hey, give us, what are the 3 best inns in town? And you maybe had one of them ready to go. Say the one you've got ready. Ask generative AI for a name of fantasy taverns in a city by a cliff, and it'll give you a whole list of them that you can use. If they decide to go to one of those that you didn't prepare, then you can then just ask generative AI, say, okay, so Cliff Keep Tavern, let's go ahead and use that one. What I want is a description of Cliff Keep Tavern, include some of the workers there, including the bartender, the cook, and some of the servers. Give me the name of the bard who's performing and a description of them. Give me a description of the interior of the tavern. And in that one little paragraph, you can have all of that information ready for your game that is so easy then to save to the information about your world, so that as your players continue to play in it, your world will continue to develop through all this information that you have saved. Now, again, if you're just using this for your players and your world and you're not publishing it, great, use it, keep it. If you're going to be using this information for something that is going to be published or used for profit, you better make sure that that information wasn't just pulled from somewhere else and you're stealing copyright. Make sure that you're going to use any information that you get from generative AI cautiously, right? Even story prompts, because that story might be a story that already exists. It might be an existing module that someone else already has copyrighted. So if that is the case, you need to make sure that that's not something you're using for your profit without permission. Just be very careful with that. This is what I'm saying. In fact, I would say don't do it. Write your own ideas. Come up with your own stuff if you're going to be doing it for profit. So that gives you the ideas of why you might want to use it, why I use it. Let's talk briefly about some of the considerations and a few drawbacks of it. First of all, there is a loss of human touch. One potential of relying too heavily on it is that there might not be enough emotional depth or personal connection to the storytelling. It doesn't have all the information about your world that exists already. It doesn't know what your players have done up to this point, so it may not be able to effectively tell the story you're trying to tell because it doesn't have all of that context. Next, there is a learning curve. You might have to spend a little time learning how to use generative AI effectively for it to be used in your story. I know that some of my early prompts and some of the early things that I did with it were not very rich. They weren't very helpful. They might have given me some ideas, but still the brunt of the work had to be done by me, which I think is preferable anyways. So maybe that's not entirely a detriment, but you do need to put in some time figuring out how you can use it to best to generate ideas for yourself that will be usable for your game. Another thing is AI is built on patterns. Like, it is content generated by formulaic perceptibility that exists on the internet, and it pulls patterns to you. So if you are using it, you're going to start seeing that it does have very clear patterns. One of the ones that I always see is it tries to sort of tie things in a bow when it's creating a story. It always goes for the happy ending or the everything is great, hopeful conclusion, but I don't always want that for my stories. Sometimes I want more of a cliffhanger or a darker ending that's going to drive the players into finding alternative solutions or have a little bit more moral dilemma. And it's not exactly great at that. It sort of likes to wrap things up because that is the pattern of a story. Things are wrapped up at the end, and that may not be what you're looking for. And then, of course, the biggest thing to consider and drawback is the privacy and the ethical concerns of the fact that it is generating a lot of these ideas from copyrighted content. And you have to weigh, how do you feel about that? How are you going to use it? And how is it going to affect the artists and the creators that are having their information used by generative AI? Again, I don't think it's going to affect it at all for your private games right around your table, because you're generally just grabbing images from the internet that are probably copyrighted anyways and showing them. You're not profiting from them. You're not using them for personal gain other than helping you tell a verbal story between friends. But you have to consider all of that if this is something that you do as part of your business and your life. If that story is going out to the world, if you, for example, were part of Critical Role or Dimension 20 or any of the big groups, I don't think generative AI would be a useful tool for them at all. It would be a very dangerous tool to use because it could get them into some legal and ethical complications. So think about that when you're using this. Just keep it in the forefront of your mind. If you're using it, use it privately. So hopefully you have a pretty good understanding now of my opinions on the matter and how I have used this technology in my own games and my own settings. So for the first time in Season 3, let's head on over to Tricks of the Trade. So for Tricks of the Trade today, I'm going to do something a little fun. I'm going to give you a few examples of generative AI prompts. These are specifically text-based prompts for text-based output that I have used in my own stories, and give you some of the examples that have been given to me as responses from the generative AI. So first, when my characters were playing a Forgotten Realms game, they were going through a part where one character was trying to get them to sing karaoke with them throughout the campaign. And so I asked generative AI to use this prompt. Give me 50 song titles for songs a bard might sing in the Forgotten Realms. And I got some pretty fun ones. I got Bard's Tale in Waterdeep, Elven Dreams, Moonlit Respite, Tavern of the Dragon's Hoard, Drow's Lament, Davian Rhapsody, Serpent Kingdom, Cholton Jungle Boogie, Storm King's Thunder, and Beneath the Underdark, just as a few examples of the many more that it generated. And I thought those were great because then the character could just drop them in as he was asking the other party members to karaoke with him. Hey, let's sing Drow's Lament together at karaoke tonight. And they never did sing karaoke with this character, but it was one of those things that just kind of always caused them to have a good laugh and really added a lot of depth to the character and to the world. Another example of a prompt that I used was in a very recent setting very recent campaign story, and I asked Claude to give me an idea for a D&D critical miss on an attack from a stone giant. And this is the response that I got back from it. The stone giant rears back and swings its massive club overhead, attempting to crush its foe, but as it brings the club down with tremendous force, its foot slips on a loose stone. The giant stumbles, loses its balance, causing the club to crash onto its own head instead. The giant teeters, dazed by the self-inflicted blow. It will be at disadvantage on its next attack as it tries to shake off the effects of slamming its own skull with its powerful weapon, which I thought was a great description. I mean, a lot of times we have these moments where critical successes or critical failures happen, and you want a good description of what that looks like. Throw a prompt into ChatGPT or Claude or Bard like this and just see what it comes up with. It might give you a great idea, or it just might give you something that you can build off of. And last but not least, in the last session that I ran, I gave this prompt to Google Bard. In the city of Scardale in the Forgotten Realms, my party stops at a tavern looking for work. Give me a few ideas of what they find and a description of the tavern. Now, Bard came back with a very large response that had a ton of information in it. The first thing it did was it gave me a tavern, the Weary Werven in Scarsdale, and it gave me a description. Nestled on a cobbled alley in Scarsdale, it is a testament to survival rather than opulence. Weathered timber creaks under its own weight, and the sign above swings precariously, depicting a werven gnawing on a rusted helm. Moss crawls up the stone base, while the windows are grimy and uneven, but offer a glimpse of flickering lamplight within. So inside, there are 2 job boards and a chalkboard that it describes above the bar, each offering different job postings. It also gives a description of what those jobs might be. One of them, muscle needed for warehouse cleanup, in parentheses, goblin suspected. Now, this is the one that my players ended up doing. And so I later went on to say, describe the warehouse and the cleanup job. So it gave me an entire description of what that job entailed and what the players were going to have to go through. It ended up being a very fun session where the players ended up sort of allying with a goblin that was in there who was just working there but it was too old to really do anything. So they built a pulley system for this goblin to be able to keep the space clean themselves, and would benefit the tavern keeper whose warehouse it was in the long run. It was a really interesting setting, and the whole idea came from this generative prompt. So that is it for today. Please go ahead and take these ideas, use them, run with them, have fun learning and using generative AI in your own private games. But please do remember that these ideas are generated from a lot of existing artwork and existing creators that are out there. So don't use it for monetary gain. Don't use it for something that you're going to publish or make public. Use it for fun in the privacy of your own home, like you have always done with artwork and stories that have been created. Don't repurpose those things for your own profit. Create something new and unique if you're going to do something for yourself and you want to make a living at this. As always, you can find me on Instagram at dungeons_dragons_psychology, where there is a Linktree link to all of the various places you can connect with me online. As I mentioned at the start of this episode, I will not be publishing as frequently this year, but I will be trying to give you longer episodes with more content and more research behind them, especially as I get into writing the dissertation that I'm going to be working on for my PhD program, which is going to include research on role-playing games and things like that, so that I will be providing some of that information to you as I researched it as part of the show for this season. Look forward to some fun guests coming up and the return of a few of my friends chatting with me. They haven't been on in a while at the end of last season because I was very busy finishing my master's degree, but I look forward to having them come back and chatting with me on the show and giving you guys new information and ideas. I know that a lot of you out there have mentioned to me that you really like those episodes, so don't worry, they will be coming back this season. As always, I really appreciate all the support and the love that you have shown this show. If you haven't taken the time to give it a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please do that. It really helps the show grow and keeps us relevant in the ratings and lets other people find this content as well. And it's just something I personally would really appreciate from the listeners who do keep coming back for each episode and taking in this content. Please give back to me by doing that for the show. And as always, I will see you next session.